Okay, right. So I'm going to be talking about public shaming, but particularly the way in which it's used to control women. Other way, sorry. So that kind of will give you an idea of the kind of thing that I'm going to be talking about. This was from the 2nd century AD, and I think that it sort of sums up the whole of the way in which women tend to be shamed. There is something integral about women that is considered to be shameful. It has a very long pedigree, and like other forms of shaming, it's about social control. But for women, it takes a very particular form, and that is to take away a woman's autonomy and subjugate her to men. And it does that in particular by focusing on her desires, so that she can't have any autonomous desires. It is considered shameful for a woman to desire anything, whether that be food or sex or power, in a way that it just simply isn't for men. And these themes are things that we see cropping up again and again and again. But usually the focus takes the form of a focus on her sexuality. So I just want to start off with some historical examples. So this is burning of witches. And the accusations of witchcraft focus in particular, again, on women's sexual and communicative autonomy. So you were most likely to be accused of being a witch if you were a widow, a spinster, or a midwife. And the reason for that is, in particular, widows and spinsters, they were autonomous, in particular widows actually, that escaped their fathers and then escaped their husbands as well. So they were completely, free to roam around being these sexually deviant beings who would consort with the devil and tempt lone men into their beds. And midwives, similarly, they helped other women to escape the shame of having had sex, potentially by helping them to abort a fetus or helping them to avoid labor pains. And obviously, consequence-free sex for women is, not acceptable. So they had to be shamed as well and accused of being witches. And the way in which, beyond the fact that there was a specific type of woman who was accused of being a witch, the way in which they were questioned and the way in which they were tortured also shows the sort of sexual elements that were underlying this kind of the sort of witch hunt craze. So the questioning often focused on a woman's sexuality and was very, very keen to figure out exactly how she'd had sex with the devil and how many times and in what different ways. But also women were sexually tortured, so they would have their genitals and their breasts mutilated and branded. And the other aspect of witches, of course, and this is again particularly the midwives who were considered to be sort of educated, they had too much access to the autonomy of speech. They might be able to write, and that was considered incredibly worrying. And of course, the sort of female-only space of a labour room is a very scary place because men aren't in there, and women might gossip, and they might talk about men, and God knows what might happen. So the next here is the scold's bridle, and this obviously really focuses on a woman's speech again. So again, it was women who were gossiping, and again, it was sometimes called the gossip's bridle, which again shows this sort of fear of autonomous female speech where women are getting together and we don't really know what they're saying. So a scold was a rude, clamorous woman, and basically if you spent too much time gossiping or nagging men, you might end up with one of these on your head. That is from Germany in the 18th century, I think. And so what happened was the woman would have this put on her, and she would be sort of led around the town so everyone could see what a shameful woman she was, that she used her voice. And some of them, like this one, had a little bell on them to just really draw attention to her and make sure that she didn't escape people's disapprobation. And basically what it was, as you can see, was this iron muzzle, and there would be this tongue clamp, which in many cases had a spike on it, so that if she did try to speak, her tongue would be lacerated. Next up, the rotary cage. This is for women who tempted men by being prostitutes. So they would sit in the chair, and the men could come and sort of turn it around. And of course, the men who paid for these women's services never got put in the chair. It was always the women who were the naughty, deviant ones. And just a couple more examples, just to give you a flavour of how comprehensively women have been shaved for daring to have sex over the ages. So this is a woman who was accused of what was called, I'm not going to say it in a French accent because that would be embarrassing, but collaboration horizontale. So basically this was after World War II and during the liberation of France. As you can see, all the people around her are having a jolly good time at her expense because she slept or was suspected of sleeping with a German soldier. Interestingly, women who had abortions were often accused of having slept with German soldiers because they couldn't think of any other reason why you'd want to have an abortion. But this has been something that's been going on since biblical times. It used to be a punishment for adultery. There was no similar punishment for men. It happened to German women who slept with the French troops who occupied the Rhineland in 1923. It happened to German women who slept with non-Aryan men during the Third Reich. It happened during the Spanish Civil War. What's quite interesting, I think, about what happened in France is it sort of happened immediately after the liberation, but then there was a sort of second wave after prisoners of war and concentration camp victims came back, which I think shows this way in which the shaming of women is really about asserting masculine control and domination, because these were men who, I guess, had had their masculinity questioned, they'd been humiliated by having been captured, and their countries had been occupied, and this was a way of asserting their masculine dominance again. This was Belgian women, again, who had been accused of collaborating with the Germans, so they were feathered and tarred and forced to pose naked doing the Heil Hitler. This is a woman in Ireland who was accused of sleeping with a soldier, and it was in 1971 at the start of the Troubles, and this was her punishment. And again, there doesn't seem to have been any punishment for him. So as you can see, there's this long history of women who dare to have sex outside of a sort of patriarchally defined and approved of scenario, and they are punished for it. And it's always the women who are punished for it rather than the men. And I would suggest that that is because of this idea that women who are displaying sexual independence is worrying for the social order as it stands. So those are sort of historical examples. I want to take you into the present day now to show you how it's still going on. As you can see, this is from 2012, women who eat on tubes. There's no website, as far as I'm aware, of men who eat on tubes. Anyway, so people are encouraged to take pictures of women who have the audacity to eat on tubes and upload them to this Tumblr. And again, it's this idea that these women are so covetous of food, and it's so shocking that they should want to eat and have hunger, that they would eat on the tube rather than, because women don't eat and we don't have bodily functions. And so the reason I include that, it's only a minor example, but I think it's important to demonstrate that it's wider than just sex. It's about women having desire at all, and that's showed in the way that it's not just about explicitly sexual acts. I don't know how well you can read this, but this is a comment that was made by someone on Facebook about the rape victim. Who I don't know if you've heard about. I'll tell you about it. It was called the Steubenville case in the US. Essentially what happened was a girl got incredibly drunk and was sexually assaulted by a group of college football players, and pictures were taken of the assault and videos were made of the assault, and they were put online, and they were shared around, and the girl was thoroughly mocked. And, for example, there were. This was one of the men who was involved in the sexual assault. The dead body that he's talking about is the very drunk, unconscious girl who they were sort of dragging around and raping with their fingers and that kind of thing. So why have I included this here? Well, basically, as you can see, let me see, can I go back? I can go back. So this woman is saying, we shouldn't feel too bad for her because she's known as Steubenville's train whore. So essentially, she can't be raped because she has sex with lots of other people anyway, so who cares what happens to her? And I guess the reason this is included is you would hope that if we're shaming anyone, it would be this man. But in fact, what happened when the media were reporting it was they felt desperately sorry for these men who had ruined their lives by this one foolish act. And no one really had much sympathy for the actual rape victim. Moving on. I have no idea how I'm doing for time. How am I doing for time? Anyone? Never mind. Okay, let's rush. Okay, so this is another example of the way in which women can't have consequence-free sex. Basically, this is Penelope Trunk. As you can see, she tweeted that she was having a miscarriage, and she was very pleased about this because it meant she didn't have to deal with America's abortion laws. You know, it's basically just the way in which, the same as the way in which midwives were called witches for helping women deal with labor pains, for helping women potentially abort fetuses. Women must not have consequence-free sex, because if we did, the world would fall apart. Rush Limbaugh would be very, very upset about it. He said, "What does it say about the college co-ed Susan Fluke, who goes before a congressional committee and essentially says that she must be paid to have sex? What does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? It makes her a prostitute. She wants to be paid to have sex. She's having so much sex, she can't afford the contraception." This was a woman who stood up and said that there should be, you know, like we have on the NHS, state-funded contraception. But there's a huge sense that if a woman wants to have contraception, then that must mean she's some kind of slut. Another example, this is a picture of a guy who's getting a blowjob in an Eminem concert. As you can see, he's very happy about it. And the reason we know about this picture is because cropped off at the bottom is a girl who became known as Slain Girl, whose name trended worldwide. Her full name and her details were posted online as soon as people could find it. She was called a vile slut, a whore, rotten, slut, hoe, disgusting. Am I supposed to feel sorry for hashtag slain slut? She deserves everything she gets. And the only reference to the man was that he was a hero, and can someone get him a medal, please? And that's, you know, clearly how he feels about it. So again, it's just showing these double standards of how, if women engage in sexual acts, they will be shamed for it. Another example, this is Monica Lewinsky, who you may remember had sex with Bill Clinton a number of times, although he vociferously denied it for a while. And what's interesting about Monica Lewinsky is if you search her name on Google, what still comes up as suggested Google searches is cigar and blue dress, which were things that were linked to the affair. If you search for Bill Clinton, you get Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton diet, Bill Clinton politics, Bill Clinton net worth, Bill Clinton quotes. There is no mention of Monica Lewinsky. So again, showing how Bill Clinton manages to escape the sense of shame, but Monica Lewinsky has had to carry it forever, and in fact she's recently shown that she still can't get a job as a result of it. There's loads of examples of this kind of thing. There was a 14-year-old girl called Amber Cole who gave a boy a blowjob because he said that he would only take her back. He was her ex-boyfriend, he would only take her back if she gave him a blowjob. Got his friends to film it, they put it up online. She's been called a slut and a whore. Nothing's happened to them. A girl called Felicia Garcia slept with 4 football players who then called her a slut all over school. She killed herself 4 days later. And celebrities are not free from this scourge of female sexuality either. This is Emma Watson, who did not have nudes released of her. However, she was threatened with having nudes released as soon as she declared herself a feminist. And what's particularly interesting about that is it's again this idea that the sexual shame will be used to shut women's voices down. So there are quotes from 4chan users. They started a countdown website saying Emma's next. It's real and it's going to happen this weekend. That feminist bitch Emma is going to show the world she is as much of a whore as any woman, which is nice. Okay, and this is a very interesting meme, which has just come out recently. So she has recently revealed that she knew it was a hoax because she didn't have any nudes online. And at the time, when nudes were being released of women, people were saying, well, you shouldn't take nudes of yourself and send them to people if you don't want people to look at them, i.e. you're a slut and you deserve everything you get. And this is just such an interesting picture of, basically, it's the Madonna and the whore juxtaposition that's being brought up there. I really like that. Obviously in a I don't like it way, but I like it as an example. This is a rape threat that was sent to me. Oh, well, actually, this one actually isn't a threat. But that just sums up most of the threats that I got. Last summer, or maybe 2 summers ago now, I ran a campaign to get female representation on banknotes, and as a result, I got about 3 weeks' worth of rape and death threats, incredibly graphic, incredibly detailed, which parts of their body would be put into which part of my body. And the reason I bring this up now is that obviously this is slightly different because there wasn't so much this sense of shaming me. But what was very interesting about it was this emphasis on shutting me up through the threat of sexual violence. And again, it's just showing how women's voices and women's sexuality are seen as intrinsically linked. So another one I got was, shut your whore mouth or I'll shut it for you and choke you with my dick. And for me, it just felt very reminiscent of the scold's bridle of, make sure you don't speak out, particularly on behalf of other women, or you'll get what's coming to you in a particularly vile sexual way. Anyway, finally, I just want to end on a positive note. This is Emma Holton. And 4 years ago, she couldn't log on to her Facebook account. And she eventually managed to log in, and she found this horde of messages saying, do your parents know that you're a slut? Did you get fired? Who did this to me? Send me more nudes, or I'll send the ones I have to your boss. Essentially, what had happened was an ex-boyfriend had posted pictures of her on the internet, nude pictures of her on the internet without her consent, in a trend that's been known as revenge porn. And it's increasingly happening, particularly to young children who are not young children, but underage boys and girls who are sexting to each other. Anyway, what's great about this story is that while she felt completely violated, as you would do, she decided that the only way to get her sense of ownership of her body back was to get pictures taken of herself naked and to release them herself so that she could say, essentially, I've already sworn, so I'll swear again, fuck you, to the man who did this to her. And I think that that's a really strong and powerful statement, because I think it's incredibly important that we remember amongst all this that while women's bodies and women's sexuality have been continually shamed, the naked female form is not shameful. There is nothing wrong with it. It's just a naked body. What's wrong with it is the messages that we try to impose upon it. And I think by doing this, she's done a really brilliant thing and taken a stand for women everywhere. And I just want to end by reminding you of a Renaissance quote that I always think is very apt in these circumstances, which it says that an eloquent woman is never chaste. And I think that you can see, hopefully, from all the examples that I've been given, that that is something that we still very much think is true today. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Sorry for the very rushed delivery.
Oh, no. I wanted to ask you just one question, which you kind of alluded to yourself anyway. You said you weren't shamed. What happened to you was slightly different. You were trolled.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's more than slightly different, I think. The difference, of course, is that you were attacked by a kind of extreme, outrageous, misogynistic group of people. So I just wanted to ask you, first, how did that feel when you were on the receiving end of that?
Well, I mean, it was terrifying. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what they were capable of. And they were very clear that they were trying to hunt me down. I mean, they found addresses that were linked to me and started posting them all over the internet, and were very specific about the times that they were going to do the very specific threats that they were making. So it felt really scary.
So it felt real. It felt like it was like actual threats. Yeah. Did you have a support network around you?
Yeah, I did. I had my boyfriend at the time was great, and I had my feminist network all sort of stood up and started trying to support me. But ultimately, it is quite isolating when you get threats on social media, particularly the way Twitter works. Your feed is your own personal page, and no one else is going to see things that are sent to you directly. So it is there is this sense of isolation that no one else can see that you're being continually threatened. Right.
But do you think, no question, but do you think having that kind of support network around you kind of helped? I mean, do you think it helped?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I, at certain points, because it wasn't just, it was everyone actually, most of the country was horrified by what was happening, and I got loads and loads of messages of support, which at certain times did drown out the threats, which was great. And it did make me feel, okay, so there are more people who are with me and don't want to rape me than people who do, so that was good.
Right. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Caroline.